7 magnificent properties in Miami Beach belong to us, Genevieve declared, her voice ringing through the opulent law office, each syllable a perfectly polished jewel of triumph. And for Kenora Darling, just the old warehouse, in Mississippi of all places. A sharp, cold current ran through Kenora's veins, a familiar, acrid taste of public humiliation that had defined her final years in the Monroe family orbit. But beneath the polished mahogany table, her left hand resting on the worn leather of her purse, brushed against the smooth, cool metal of a small, forgotten key. A silent promise of leverage none in this gilded room could fathom. Genevieve, at 35, moved through the world like a perfectly coiffed predator who had never known denial. Her blonde hair, styled into a cascade of impossibly smooth waves, gleamed under the antique chandelier. Her designer gown, a silk sheath, in a colour Kenora could only describe as expensive, probably cost more than Kenora's annual grocery bill. She clutched the deed papers, 7 crisp sheets of official parchment, as if they were Olympic gold medals, holding them aloft for a selfie she took with her diamond-encrusted phone. The room erupted in a chorus of fawning applause. Cousins Kenora barely remembered distant relatives, who'd crawled out of the woodwork the moment Percival's obituary hit the papers. All clapped and cheered. Senator Hayes Percival's perpetually indebted brother-in-law guffawed loudly, a sound like gravel tumbling down a chute. Kenora remained seated. Her weathered hands, the hands of an engineer who had spent a lifetime building and fixing, folded serenely in her lap. Her gaze swept over the faces, flushed with second-hand excitement, settling briefly on her son Alistair. 40 years old, he sat beside Genevieve, a statue carved from embarrassment, and something that might have been shame. His dark hair, so like Percival's, was impeccably styled. His expensive suit, tailored to conceal the softness of a life lived without physical toil. He wouldn't meet her eyes, choosing instead to stare at his immaculately manicured fingernails, while his wife performed her one-woman show about inherited wealth. "Alistair," Kenora said quietly. Her voice, though soft, cut through Genevieve's celebratory monologue like a surgeon's scalpel. "You're awfully quiet." He finally looked up, and in his eyes, Kenora saw not grief for his father, nor concern for her, but a profound shame. Shame that his mother, the formidable Kenora Monroe, had been awarded what everyone clearly considered the consolation prize. "Mother," he began, his voice trailing off, his glance flicking to Genevieve as if seeking permission to speak. "Alistair's just overwhelmed," Genevieve interjected smoothly, sliding back into her chair. Her grace was that of someone utterly convinced of her rightful place at the head of any table. 7 properties is a lot to manage. We'll probably need to hire a property management company, perhaps even buy a yacht to travel between them all. Senator Hayes chortled. "Genevieve, you simply must invite us to the housewarming parties, all 7 of them." "Oh, naturally," Genevieve purred, turning to Kenora with a smile that felt less sympathetic and more predatory. "Kenora, you're welcome to come, of course. I know the warehouse isn't much, but perhaps you could turn it into something useful. A workshop, maybe. You were always so practical." The word she used when she meant poor, when she meant beneath her notice, when she meant someone who fixed things instead of buying new ones. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste on Kenora's tongue. Kenora reached into her worn leather purse, the same purse she'd carried for 15 years, because it was well made and served its purpose, and pulled out the crisp envelope containing her inheritance documents. The deed to a 40,000-square-foot warehouse in Yazoo City, Mississippi. The colossal, unassuming building where Percival and she had spent countless weekends during their marriage, back when she was still trying to understand why he'd been so insistent about buying property in such an unremarkable place. A warehouse. Penelope Atherton, a cousin with a penchant for poorly concealed pity, whispered. "Well, Kenora, at least you'll have somewhere to store things." More muffled laughter, more sympathetic glances from people who had never offered sympathy when it might have been useful. Kenora stood up slowly, her joints protesting after 2 hours of legal proceedings and family theatre. The room fell silent, everyone watching her with the morbid curiosity usually reserved for roadside accidents. "Solicitor Caldwell," she addressed the lawyer directly, her voice calm and steady. "Is there anything else I need to sign?" "No, Mrs. Monroe," Solicitor Caldwell replied, adjusting his spectacles. "Your inheritance is straightforward. The warehouse, the surrounding 40 acres, and all mineral rights are transferred to you free and clear." Mineral rights. Kenora noticed the phrase sailed clean over everyone's heads, including Genevieve's. Genevieve was too busy mentally decorating her Miami mansions to pay attention to legal technicalities. Kenora tucked the documents back into her purse. "Well," she said, her gaze sweeping over the faces still flushed with second-hand excitement. "Congratulations to everyone. I hope you all enjoy your good fortune." She walked toward the heavy oak door, then paused with her hand on the cold brass handle. Alistair was looking at her now. Finally, his expression a mixture of guilt and something that might have been dawning concern. "Son," Kenora said, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet room. "You really don't know, do you?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Genevieve's smile froze on her face like ice forming on a window pane. "Don't know what?" she asked, her voice higher-pitched than usual. Kenora looked at her son. This man she had raised and loved and tried to prepare for a world more complicated than inherited wealth and Miami real estate. A world where appearances could be deceiving, where the most valuable things weren't always the most obvious ones, where a warehouse in Mississippi might be worth more than 7 mansions in Florida. "Don't know what, Mother?" Alistair echoed, finally finding his voice. Kenora smiled. Then the first genuine smile she'd managed since Percival's funeral 3 weeks ago. Not a happy smile exactly, but the expression of someone who knew something that everyone else was about to learn the hard way. "Nothing, sweetheart. Nothing at all." She opened the door and walked out of the law office, leaving behind a room full of people who thought they knew exactly what Percival Monroe's final wishes had accomplished. Behind her, she could hear Genevieve's voice rising in pitch and volume, demanding answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. The drive home from Solicitor Caldwell's office passed in a blur of Memphis traffic and churning thoughts. Her hands gripped the steering wheel of her 15-year-old Honda Civic, meticulously maintained, much like everything else in her life since the divorce. Genevieve's triumphant laughter echoed in her memory like fingernails on a chalkboard. 7 houses in Miami Beach. The words had been delivered with the kind of vindictive glee usually reserved for lottery winners, rubbing their fortune in the faces of people who'd bought losing tickets. Kenora pulled into the parking lot of Riverside Gardens, the modest apartment complex she'd called home for the past 4 years. Not because she couldn't afford better, but because she'd learned to value substance over appearances, function over flash. The 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor had everything she needed. Good bones, reliable plumbing, and neighbors who minded their own business. Mrs. Albright from 3B was watering her balcony plants as Kenora climbed the exterior stairs, and she waved with the casual friendliness of someone who knew her as the quiet woman in 3C who always paid her rent early and never complained about noise. "How was your day, dear?" Mrs. Albright called out her voice, carrying the genuine concern that came from small kindnesses between strangers. "Eventful," Kenora replied, managing a smile. "Percival's will was read today. Oh my, I hope everything went smoothly. If only she knew. As smoothly as these things ever go." Inside her apartment, Kenora dropped her purse on the small dining table and stood in the silence that had become her constant companion since the divorce. Not the oppressive silence of loneliness, but the peaceful quiet of someone who'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being abandoned. The sealed envelope Percival's solicitor had handed her sat in her purse like a time bomb. Percival's careful handwriting spelling out her name in the script she'd known for 32 years. They'd met in college. Kenora, the scholarship kid from rural Mississippi, studying civil engineering. Percival, the business major whose family owned half of Memphis's commercial real estate. She'd fallen in love with his laugh. His curiosity about how things worked, his complete lack of awareness about his own privilege. She'd married him despite his money, not because of it. The divorce had been civilized, even friendly. 28 years of marriage ending not in hatred or betrayal, but in the quiet recognition that they'd grown into people who loved each other, but couldn't live together anymore. Percival had needed constant motion social events, business dinners with people who talked about quarterly profits over expensive wine. Kenora had needed space to think, to create, to exist without performing the role of successful businessman's wife. They'd remained friends after the papers were signed. Awkward at first, then gradually finding a comfortable distance that let them share coffee occasionally, without the weight of failed expectations crushing the conversation. She made herself a cup of Earl Grey tea, the same brand she'd been drinking since graduate school, and settled into her reading chair by the window. The Memphis skyline glittered in the late afternoon light, a view she'd chosen specifically because it reminded her that cities were just engineering projects, scaled-up problems, solved with concrete and steel and careful planning. The envelope opened easily, revealing 3 pages of Percival's careful handwriting, and a smaller sealed envelope marked, "Open after reading letter. My dearest Kenora." It began, and she could hear his voice in every word. The slight southern accent he'd never quite shaken, despite decades of business school and corporate meetings. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you've just endured what I suspect was a rather unpleasant performance from our family, specifically from Genevieve, who has been practicing her victory speech for months, completely unaware that she's celebrating winning a game she doesn't understand." Kenora paused, a laugh escaping despite herself. Even dead Percival could read people with surgical precision. "That, Kenora, I need you to know that everything I'm about to explain was planned with mathematical precision, not as revenge. I'm not petty enough for that. Despite what you might think about my final gift distribution, this is education. Brutal, expensive education that our son desperately needs if he's going to become a man instead of remaining a trust fund baby with good intentions." She sipped her tea and continued reading, feeling the familiar mixture of frustration and admiration that Percival had always inspired. He'd been the only person she'd ever known who could make questionable decisions seem like acts of wisdom if you squinted hard enough. "The Miami houses are beautiful, Kenora. Absolutely gorgeous. Genevieve has been driving by them for 2 years, taking photos, planning renovations she couldn't afford. What she doesn't know, what none of them know, is that I bought those properties with leveraged financing specifically to create this moment." Her engineering mind immediately started calculating debt-to-value ratios, mortgage payments, property taxes on 7 luxury homes. The numbers that Genevieve would discover when the celebrations ended and reality set in. The warehouse, on the other hand, well, you remember the warehouse. You remember why I bought it. Even though at the time you thought I was being sentimental about your hometown, Kenora remembered. They'd been driving through Mississippi on their way to New Orleans for their 10th anniversary when she'd noticed the geological formations around Yazoo City, the limestone bedrock, the way the land sloped toward the river, the mineral deposits that suggested something valuable beneath the surface. She'd mentioned it casually, the way engineers notice things that other people miss. And Percival had surprised her by actually listening. "I know you, Kenora. I know you're sitting there right now calculating mortgage payments and wondering how Alistair is going to afford 7 Miami mansions on his current income. The answer is he can't. Those houses will bankrupt him within 6 months unless he makes some very smart decisions very quickly. But you My brilliant ex-wife, you're about to discover that your warehouse sits on something considerably more valuable than waterfront views and yacht slips. Kenora set down the letter, her heart beating faster. Percival had always been good at surprises, but this felt different. This felt like the kind of surprise that changed everything. The smaller envelope contained a single key and an address. She recognized the law office of attorney Eleanor Vance, an environmental lawyer who specialized in mineral rights and water resources. The same lawyer she'd met briefly at a professional conference 5 years ago, back when Kenora was still consulting on engineering projects, and Eleanor Vance was presenting a paper on groundwater rights in the Mississippi Delta. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Alistair's number appeared on the screen, and Kenora considered letting it go to voicemail, but maternal instinct, even bruised maternal instinct, made her answer. Mother. His voice sounded strained, younger than his 40 years. Are you okay? I mean, after today, with the will reading and everything? I'm fine, sweetheart. How are you handling your inheritance? That's actually why I'm calling. Genevieve wants to drive down to Miami tomorrow to look at the properties, start planning renovations, maybe hire an interior designer. She's already calling contractors about putting in infinity pools. Infinity pools on properties that probably already had them financed with debt that would swallow Alistair's savings like quicksand. That sounds ambitious. Mother, I know today was awkward. The way Genevieve reacted, the things she said about your warehouse. He paused. She didn't mean to be cruel. Yes, she did. Kenora thought. Genevieve had meant every calculated word, every dismissive gesture, every moment of public humiliation. But Alistair wasn't ready to see that yet. Son, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you know how much it costs to maintain 7 luxury properties in Miami Beach? Silence on the other end of the line. Then, we'll figure it out. Father left us the houses free and clear, right? No mortgages. Oh, my sweet, naive boy. Did Solicitor Caldwell mention anything about existing liens or financing? I don't. Genevieve was handling most of the financial details. She's better with that stuff than I am. Genevieve, who'd majored in communications, and whose idea of financial planning involved maxing out credit cards on designer handbags. Genevieve, who was about to discover that inheriting 7 mansions wasn't the same thing as being able to afford them. Alistair, I want you to do something for me. Before you sign anything, before you make any major decisions about those properties, have an accountant review all the financial obligations. Promise me. Mother. Why are you being so paranoid? Father loved us. He wouldn't have left us something that would hurt us. Kenora looked at Percival's letter, at his careful explanation of brutal education and necessary lessons, and realized that her ex-husband had understood their son better than Alistair understood himself. You're right, sweetheart. Your father loved you very much more than you know. After they hung up, Kenora sat in her chair watching the sunset over Memphis, thinking about warehouses and Miami mansions, about the difference between gifts and lessons, about the price of learning who you really are when everything you thought you wanted turns out to cost more than you can afford. Tomorrow she would drive to Mississippi and unlock whatever secrets Percival had left buried beneath 40 acres of Delta soil. Tonight she would mourn not just her ex-husband, but the innocence her son was about to lose when reality came calling on his Miami dreams. Some educations she was learning were more expensive than others, and some gifts were really just lessons wrapped in prettier paper. 18 months before Percival's death, the call came on a Tuesday morning, while Kenora was reviewing blueprints for a water treatment facility in Jackson. Her phone showed Percival's name, which was unusual. They typically communicated through text messages or brief practical conversations about Alistair's birthday gifts or holiday schedules. Kenora. Do you have a time to talk? Not over the phone. In person. Something in his voice made her set down her coffee and pay attention. In the 4 years since their divorce, she'd heard Percival sound tired, frustrated, occasionally amused, but never this hollow. Of course. Is everything all right? I need to meet somewhere private away from Memphis, away from anywhere we might run into people we know. He paused, and Kenora heard traffic noise in the background. What about that cafe in Yazoo City, the one near the old warehouse? The warehouse. They'd driven past it a dozen times over the years. That massive concrete structure sitting on 40 acres of Delta farmland, like a monument to abandoned industry. Percival had bought it during their marriage. A whim, she'd thought then, though she'd provided the geological survey that had convinced him the land had potential. The Magnolia Cafe Percival that's 3 hours from Memphis. I know. Can you meet me there Thursday at 2? Kenora agreed more out of curiosity than concern. Percival had always been dramatic prone to making simple conversations feel like international negotiations. But when she saw him 2 days later sitting in a corner booth at the small-town cafe with his shoulders curved inward and his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, she realized this wasn't drama. This was fear. You look terrible, she said, sliding into the booth across from him, always the engineer, straight to the point. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Kenora, I'm sick. The words hung between them like a diagnosis neither of them wanted to acknowledge. She studied his face, noting the subtle signs she'd missed during their occasional coffee meetings. The weight loss, the fatigue around his eyes, the careful way he moved like someone conserving energy. How sick? Heart. Genetic cardiomyopathy. The doctors say I have maybe 2 years. Probably less. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup like it was an anchor. I've known for 6 months. Been trying to figure out how to handle things. Things. Alistair. Genevieve. The mess I've made of my son's life by giving him everything without ever teaching him the cost of anything. Kenora leaned back against the worn vinyl booth, processing this information. Percival had always been a planner. Someone who thought 5 moves ahead in every situation. If he was telling her about his diagnosis, it wasn't because he needed emotional support. It was because he needed something else. What do you want from me, Percival? I want you to help me save our son. He pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents. Bank statements. Property records. Financial projections that made her engineering mind immediately start calculating ratios and risk assessments. Look at this, he said, spreading papers across the table between their coffee cups. Really look at it. The Miami properties. 7 luxury homes purchased over the past 18 months, with financing that made her stomach clench. Each house was beautiful, expensive, and leveraged to the breaking point. The combined monthly carrying costs exceeded Alistair's annual income by a factor of 3. Percival, what were you thinking? I was thinking about Genevieve. His voice carried a bitterness Kenora had rarely heard from him. Have you watched her lately? Kenora really watched her. She had. At family gatherings, holiday dinners, the few occasions when their post-divorce politeness had put them in the same room. Genevieve moved through Alistair's life like someone playing a role, the devoted wife, the loving daughter-in-law, the woman who just happened to know the exact value of every gift, every dinner, every gesture of affection. She doesn't love him, Kenora said quietly. She loves the Monroe name. She loves the bank account, the social status, the idea of inheriting wealth she didn't earn. Percival's hands were shaking slightly as he organized the documents. I've been testing her, Kenora. Little things at first, mentioning financial setbacks that didn't exist, talking about scaling back the business, suggesting we might need to be more careful with money. And she panics. Every time. She starts researching my assets online, asking Alistair about inheritance timelines, making comments about how important it is to protect the family legacy. He looked up at her with eyes that held more pain than his physical diagnosis could account for. She's already planning my funeral, Kenora. Not because she'll miss me, but because she's calculating what Alistair will inherit when I'm gone. Kenora studied the financial documents using numbers to process emotions that felt too large and complicated for words. The Miami houses were beautiful traps designed to appeal to Genevieve's desire for luxury, while creating debt obligations that would destroy anyone who couldn't see past the surface glamour. You bought these properties knowing they'd bankrupt Alistair. I bought them knowing they'd reveal Genevieve's true priorities and force Alistair to make choices about the kind of man he wants to be. Percival, that's... Kenora searched for the right word. Cruel. No, Kenora. Cruel is letting our son marry a woman who sees him as a trust fund with legs. Cruel is dying quietly and leaving him defenseless against someone who's been systematically isolating him from family and friends while positioning herself to inherit everything we built. He pulled out another set of documents. These ones, bearing her signature from 28 years ago. Geological surveys, mineral rights assessments, water table analyses, all the technical work she'd done when Percival had insisted on buying 40 acres of apparently worthless Mississippi farmland. You remember this? Of course I remember. You thought I was crazy for seeing potential in empty land. You weren't crazy, Kenora. You were right as always. He spread out updated geological reports, environmental impact studies, corporate contracts that made her breath catch in her throat. That warehouse sits on one of the purest groundwater sources in the Mississippi Delta. I've spent the last year negotiating mineral rights and water extraction contracts with 3 major corporations. The numbers on the contracts were staggering. Millions in guaranteed annual royalties with escalation clauses that would increase the payments over time. Clean, renewable income that would continue for decades. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm going to leave the warehouse to you. All of it. The land, the building, the mineral rights, the corporate contracts, everything. Kenora stared at him across the small cafe table, understanding finally dawning. You want Genevieve to think she won. You want her to celebrate inheriting 7 mansions, while I get the warehouse that everyone will see as worthless. I want Alistair to learn the difference between wealth and debt, between assets and liabilities, between someone who loves him and someone who loves his money. Percival reached across the table and took her hand. And I want you to be there to catch him when he falls. Kenora, you're the only person who ever loved our family without wanting anything in return. You're the only one who will help Alistair rebuild his life based on character instead of inheritance. His grip tightened. Will you do this? Will you let me give you the warehouse and everything that comes with it? She looked at the contracts, the geological reports, the evidence of Percival's elaborate plan to educate their son through controlled financial disaster. It was manipulative complex, and probably the most loving thing Percival had ever done as a father. What if Alistair never forgives me for having what he needed? Then he's not the man I raised him to be. But Kenora, if I know our son, and I do know him underneath all of Genevieve's influence, he'll figure it out. Maybe not immediately, maybe not easily, but eventually he'll understand that sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is the opportunity to prove what you're really made of. Kenora agreed that day, sitting in a small cafe in Mississippi, while her ex-husband planned his final act of love, disguised as betrayal. She signed documents, made promises, and accepted the responsibility of catching their son when he fell. She just hadn't realized how hard the fall would be, or how long it would take him to hit the ground. But that was still months away, on a day when Genevieve would celebrate 7 Miami mansions, while Kenora walked away with a warehouse that everyone else would see as a consolation prize. Some gifts, she was learning, were worth waiting for, and some plans were too complex to explain, until the consequences made the lessons impossible to ignore. 12 months before Percival's death, the geology lab at the University of Mississippi looked exactly like every testing facility Kenora had worked with during her consulting years. Fluorescent lights, stainless steel equipment, and the particular smell of precision instruments and scientific discovery. Dr. Coraline Thorne, the hydrogeologist Kenora had contacted through her professional network, spread the water samples and soil cores across the analysis table, like evidence in a case that would change everything. Kenora. These readings are remarkable, Dr. Thorne said, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the spectral analysis results. The aquifer beneath your Mississippi property shows mineral content and purity levels that rival some of the most valuable water sources in the world. Kenora stood beside her, her engineer's mind processing the implications, while her heart raced with the confirmation of what Percival and she had suspected. The warehouse property wasn't just sitting on good water, it was sitting on liquid gold. What kind of commercial viability are we talking about? Premium bottled water, industrial applications, pharmaceutical-grade processing. This aquifer could support multiple extraction operations simultaneously without depleting the source. Dr. Thorne pulled up computer models showing flow rates and recharge patterns. Conservatively, you're looking at sustainable extraction rates that would generate millions annually in licensing fees alone. Millions. Percival had been right, as usual. But then Percival had always been good at seeing potential where others saw empty land and abandoned buildings. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. Lab results in yet meet me at the warehouse at 4:30 p.m. Time to see our gold mine. The drive from Oxford to Yazoo City took her through Mississippi Delta country that most people saw as endless, flat farmland, punctuated by small towns that time had forgotten. But Kenora had grown up in this landscape, had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated valuable resources beneath surfaces that looked unremarkable to outsiders. Percival was already waiting when she arrived at the warehouse, his black BMW looking incongruous against the rural setting. He'd lost more weight since their cafe meeting, and Kenora noticed he moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing pain and conserving energy. "Good news or bad news?" he asked as she got out of her Honda. "Extraordinary news," Kenora said, handing him the lab reports. Dr. Thorne says the aquifer could support multiple commercial operations. Percival, this property could generate more annual income than your entire real estate portfolio. Could or will. His eyes, though shadowed with fatigue, held a spark of his old intensity. Will. I've already had preliminary conversations with corporate water divisions at 3 major companies. They're all interested in long-term extraction contracts. Percival smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness Kenora had seen from him since his diagnosis. "Show me." They walked the property together, Kenora explaining the geological formations that indicated groundwater flow, Percival asking questions with the focused intensity that had made him successful in business. The warehouse itself was massive, but unremarkable. A concrete structure that could house manufacturing operations or storage facilities. But beneath their feet lay something infinitely more valuable. The beauty of this, Kenora explained, stopping at a point where the land sloped slightly toward a natural depression, is that it's renewable. Unlike oil or gas extraction, responsible water harvesting actually helps maintain aquifer health. We could generate income from this land for decades without depleting the resource. She caught the pronoun slip, the unconscious return to thinking of Percival and herself as a team, despite 4 years of divorce. You. This is your property, your plan. No, Kenora, this is our plan now, our son's future. He pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. I need you to understand what I'm asking of you. The papers outlined a complex estate structure designed to transfer ownership of the warehouse and all mineral rights to Kenora upon Percival's death, while the Miami properties would go directly to Alistair. But the real complexity lay in the corporate contracts, licensing agreements with Nestlé Waters, Coca-Cola, and Danone that would begin generating income the moment extraction operations started. You've already negotiated the corporate deals. Kenora felt a tremor of awe mixed with a familiar exasperation. I've been working on this for 8 months, Kenora. using shell companies, environmental lawyers, water rights specialists. The contracts are signed and sealed, just waiting for ownership transfer to activate them. Kenora studied the financial projections, her engineering mind automatically calculating cash flow, operational costs, and long-term sustainability. The numbers were staggering. Guaranteed annual royalties starting at $2.3 million, with escalation clauses that would increase payments based on extraction volume and commodity pricing. Percival, this is... She struggled to find words adequate to the scope of what he was showing her. This is generational wealth. This could support Alistair's family for the rest of their lives. If Alistair learns to value sustainable assets over flashy liabilities, if he discovers the difference between earning wealth and inheriting debt, if he figures out that sometimes the most valuable things look unremarkable on the surface. The plan was becoming clearer and more brutal as Percival explained the carefully orchestrated financial education he'd designed for their son. The Miami properties would drain Alistair's resources, force him to make hard decisions about debt, and priorities, reveal Genevieve's true motivations, when luxury became a liability instead of an asset. What if he can't handle it? What if the pressure destroys him instead of teaching him? Kenora's voice was tight with a mother's fear. Then I was wrong about the man I raised, and you'll be there to help him rebuild from whatever's left. Percival looked out across the 40 acres that would become Kenora's inheritance. But Kenora, I don't think I'm wrong. Alistair has good instincts underneath all the privilege and enabling. He just needs circumstances that force him to use them. They spent the afternoon walking the property, Percival recording a detailed video explanation of his plan using his phone camera. He wanted documentation. He explained that would make his intentions clear if anyone ever questioned his mental capacity or decision-making process. My name is Percival Alistair Monroe, he said, speaking directly into the camera while standing beside the warehouse. I am 71 years old in full possession of my mental faculties, and I am documenting my estate planning decisions for the benefit of my family and legal representatives. He explained the financial reality of the Miami properties, the sustainable wealth represented by the Mississippi aquifer, his concerns about Alistair's marriage to Genevieve, and his faith that eventual hardship would reveal true character in everyone involved. I am leaving the warehouse property to my ex-wife, Kenora Monroe, because she discovered its value, because she has the technical expertise to manage its development responsibly, and because she is the only person I trust to help my son when he needs help most. The video recording took 2 hours with Percival explaining every financial detail, every legal consideration, every hope and fear that had motivated his decisions. When he finished, they sat on the warehouse loading dock, watching the sun set over Delta farmland that looked ordinary but held extraordinary potential. Are you sure about this, Percival? Once the will is read, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything. He handed her a sealed envelope, marked with her name. Don't open this until after the will reading. But Kenora, when that day comes, remember that everything I've done was motivated by love. Love for Alistair. Love for the family we built together. Even love for you, Kenora. You saved me once, Kenora, when we were young and I was too arrogant to see past my own privilege. You taught me to look deeper, to value substance over appearance, to build things that lasted instead of just buying things that impressed people. He stood up slowly, fatigue evident in every movement. Now I need you to save our son the same way. Driving home that evening, Kenora carried with her the weight of Percival's plan. The sealed letter that would explain everything after his death, and the knowledge that in less than a year she would inherit wealth beyond anything she'd ever imagined. But more than that, she carried the responsibility of catching Alistair, when he fell, of helping him discover who he really was, when everything he thought he wanted turned out to cost more than he could afford. Some inheritances, she was learning, came with obligation that lasted longer than the assets themselves. and some plans required more faith than fear, more love than logic, more patience than most people possessed. But Percival had always been good at seeing potential in unlikely places. He'd seen it in her 32 years ago. Now he was betting everything that he'd see it in their son when the test finally came. The months following Percival's passing passed in a quiet, almost meditative blur for Kenora. She moved through the initial weeks of grief, attending the tasteful, albeit emotionally distant memorial service that Genevieve had orchestrated. She wore the appropriate black, offered her condolences to Alistair, and accepted the superficial embraces of family members she barely knew, all while holding the tightly coiled secret of Percival's true legacy. In the shadows of this public performance of sorrow, Kenora began to work. Percival had entrusted her with a sacred trust, and her engineer's mind, accustomed to precision and systematic execution, embraced the task. Her first step was to discreetly engage attorney Eleanor Vance. They met not in Eleanor's Memphis office, but in a small, out-of-the-way diner in Jackson, a neutral territory far from prying Monroe family eyes. Percival Monroe was a very unusual client, Eleanor mused over lukewarm coffee, her sharp eyes assessing Kenora with quiet respect. His instructions for these contracts were thorough, almost as if he anticipated every conceivable contingency. He did, Kenora confirmed, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. He anticipated quite a lot. Eleanor reviewed the documents Percival had left, confirming their airtight validity. The licensing agreements with Nestlé, Coca-Cola, and Danone were indeed ironclad, activated upon the legal transfer of the Yazoo City property and its mineral rights. The process, Eleanor explained, would take several months to finalize after Percival's will was officially probated. Kenora would need to formally accept the inheritance, and then Eleanor would initiate the corporate notifications. The first quarterly payment will arrive 90 days after activation, Eleanor stated, tapping a pen against a spreadsheet that detailed the staggering figures. Percival timed this meticulously, enough time for Alistair to feel the pinch, but not so long that he'd be completely destitute. Kenora nodded, the weight of the plan settling heavily on her shoulders. He wanted Alistair to learn not to break. A costly education, Eleanor commented dryly, but perhaps a necessary one. While Eleanor worked on the legal framework, Kenora began her own due diligence on the Yazoo City property. She made several trips to the warehouse, ostensibly to clear out old junk, a plausible cover story for any inquisitive family members. But her real purpose was to meticulously inspect the site, gather soil and water samples for independent verification. Even Percival's impeccable planning couldn't override her need for her own data and begin envisioning the infrastructure needed for the water extraction. She walked the 40 acres, feeling the soft delta soil beneath her worn boots, listening to the wind whisper through the sparse trees, and imagining the hum of machinery, the quiet efficiency of a truly sustainable enterprise. She also found an ally in Liam, a retired foreman from a local water bottling plant in Meridian, recommended by Eleanor Vance. Liam, a man with calloused hands and a keen understanding of Mississippi's unique geology, became her unofficial consultant. He helped her navigate the intricacies of local permits, recommended reliable contractors, and shared invaluable insights into the practicalities of a large-scale water operation. Most folks, they just see an old concrete box, Liam said one afternoon, leaning against her Honda Civic while surveying the warehouse. But you, Mrs. Monroe, you see what's under it. That's rare. That's smart. Kenora simply nodded, knowing that smart wasn't enough. Patience and unwavering conviction would be required. Meanwhile, the fake family dialogues began. Alistair called frequently in the weeks following Percival's death, his initial grief giving way to a burgeoning excitement about the Miami properties. "Mother, you wouldn't believe these houses," Alistair gushed during one call. "Genevieve's already picked out paint swatches for the master bedroom in the largest one. She wants to turn one of the guest houses into a private spa. It's absolutely incredible. Father really outdid himself. They sound lovely, dear. Kenora would reply, her voice calm, carefully neutral. She'd listened to his elaborate plans for infinity pools and yacht slips, to Genevieve's pronouncements about lifestyle maximization, her heart aching slightly for the innocence he was about to lose. She'd offer gentle, almost innocuous advice. Have you had a good look at the tax assessments, darling? Property taxes in Florida can be quite substantial. Oh, Genevieve's handling all that. Alistair would dismiss with a wave of his hand she could almost picture. She's so good with numbers, and we have the best financial advisors now, of course. Everything's taken care of. Kenora would simply murmur her agreement, a quiet, "That's good, dear." While in her mind she pictured the meticulous calculations, Percival had laid out the inescapable arithmetic of debt that was already closing in around her son. Another call weeks later. Mother Genevieve found this incredible interior designer, Julian. He did a spread in Architectural Digest last year. He's envisioning a full revamp for the South Beach property, something very avant-garde. We're looking at a budget of, well, a substantial investment, but Julian says it will double the property value. Investment requires capital, of course, Kenora offered, picking at a loose thread on her sweater. And upkeep. Luxury properties demand constant care. Oh, it's all part of the plan. Genevieve says we have to spend money to make money. You know, Father would have wanted us to live large. Kenora stifled a sigh. Percival would have wanted Alistair to live wisely. But that was a lesson her son was not yet ready to hear. She continued to play the part of the slightly bewildered practical mother, content with her worthless warehouse offering mild warnings that were easily brushed aside by the intoxicating allure of new money. She spent her evenings immersed in geological reports, environmental regulations, and business plans for the water extraction operation. The first trickle of royalty payments, modest but consistent, began to arrive from smaller local bottling companies that Eleanor had helped her secure as initial clients, proof of concept for the larger corporate deals. Kenora, with Liam's assistance, oversaw the quiet installation of initial pumps and filtration systems at the warehouse, ensuring everything was up to the highest engineering and environmental standards. She was building not just a business, but a foundation, a safety net constructed piece by painstaking piece that would be ready when Alistair finally hit bottom. The irony was not lost on her. While Genevieve was busy spending money, they didn't have turning mansions into liabilities. Kenora was carefully cultivating a true asset. The contrast was stark, almost theatrical in its precision, exactly as Percival had designed it. She kept the larger corporate contracts in the safety deposit box, waiting for the official will reading, the moment when the public humiliation would turn to private vindication. She knew the exact moment to activate those contracts to unleash the full force of Percival's cunning plan. It wasn't about revenge, it was, as Percival had stated, an education. And Kenora, the ever-patient engineer, was simply ensuring the lesson was delivered precisely as intended. The sealed letter lay on my kitchen table like a loaded weapon. I wasn't sure I was ready to fire. 2 days had passed since the will reading. 2 days of watching social media posts from Miami as Genevieve documented her inheritance with the enthusiasm of someone who'd won the lottery and intended to spend every penny as publicly as possible. Instagram stories of champagne toasts, Facebook posts about blessed beyond measure, TikTok videos of her dancing through empty mansions while upbeat music played over captions like "From Small Town Girl to Miami Beach Queen. Inherited, blessed, living my best life." Meanwhile, Alistair had called 3 times, each conversation shorter and more strained than the last. He was trying to navigate between his wife's boisterous celebration and his mother's apparent disappointment, caught in the middle of a situation he didn't understand and wasn't equipped to handle. I poured myself a glass of the wine Percival used to bring when he visited a modest Pinot Grigio from a vineyard we'd discovered during our honeymoon in California, and finally opened the envelope that would explain everything. My dearest Kenora, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've just endured what I imagine was a rather spectacular performance from our extended family. Genevieve has probably posted 17 photos of Miami Beach houses by now, and Alistair is probably wondering why his father left his mother with what everyone thinks is a worthless warehouse. First, let me say this clearly. I am proud of you. Proud of the woman you became after our divorce. Proud of the way you rebuilt your life on your own terms. Proud of the fact that you never needed my money to prove your worth to anyone. Second, let me explain why I needed you to experience today's humiliation before you could understand today's gift. Kenora, our son has never failed at anything important. Not really. Every disappointment in his life has been cushioned by wealth. Every mistake has been corrected by resources. Every consequence has been delayed by privilege. He's 40 years old, and he's never had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. He's never had to sacrifice something he wanted for something he needed. He's never had to discover what he's actually made of when everything easy is taken away. More importantly, he has never had to see Genevieve without the protection of financial security. He's never seen what she becomes when luxury is threatened, when social status is in jeopardy, when the Monroe name stops opening doors and starts creating debt obligations. The Miami houses are beautiful, Kenora. They're also financial disasters. 7 luxury properties with combined monthly carrying costs of $95,000. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities. I've calculated every expense down to the landscaping bills. Alistair's current income covers maybe 60% of those costs. The rest will come from his savings, which will last approximately 6 months if he tries to maintain all 7 properties. After that, he'll have to start making choices. Hard choices, adult choices, the kind of choices that reveal character instead of just testing credit scores. Meanwhile, you'll be sitting on the most valuable water rights in Mississippi, generating more monthly income than all 7 Miami houses, combined completely debt-free, with a sustainable resource that will appreciate for decades. But here's the crucial part, Kenora. Alistair doesn't know that yet. And he won't know until he's had time to learn what financial pressure feels like. What it means to be married to someone who loves status more than stability. What it costs to maintain appearances when you can't afford the reality behind them. I need you to wait. I need you to let him fall. Not because I want him to suffer, but because he needs to understand that the safety net was never the money. It was always the people who loved him enough to catch him when he fell. When that day comes, and it will come, you'll be there. Not as his wealthy mother rescuing him from consequences, but as the woman who taught me to look deeper, to value substance over surface, to build things that lasted instead of buying things that impressed people. The corporate contracts are already signed and sealed. Nestlé, Coca-Cola, Danone. They're all waiting for you to activate the extraction agreements. The first quarterly payment will arrive within 90 days of my death. $2.3 million, with automatic increases built into every contract. Use the money wisely. Use it to help Alistair rebuild his life based on character instead of inheritance. Use it to show Genevieve what real wealth looks like. Not 7 mortgaged mansions, but sustainable resources managed by someone who understands the difference between assets and liabilities. And Kenora, use some of it for yourself. Buy something frivolous. Take a vacation. Live a little. You've spent 68 years taking care of everyone else. It's time someone took care of you. I love you. I always did. The divorce didn't change that. It just changed the form. You were my greatest teacher, my closest friend, and the woman who made me want to be worthy of the love you gave so freely. Our son will understand eventually. When the phone calls stop coming, when the credit cards are maxed out, when Genevieve shows him who she really is, that's when he'll remember the lessons you tried to teach him about character and integrity, and choosing substance over style. Until then, enjoy your warehouse, enjoy your water rights, enjoy watching our son discover what he's really made of when everything he thought he wanted turns out to cost more than he can afford. With all my love and gratitude, Vasiva. P.S. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Yazoo City, Box 247. Inside, you'll find the original corporate contracts, geological surveys, and a bottle of champagne I've been saving for the day you finally got everything you deserved. Open it, when Alistair comes home. I read the letter 3 times, my emotions cycling through grief, admiration, frustration, and something that might have been relief. Percival had orchestrated all of this, the public humiliation, the apparent inequality, the family celebration of what they thought was his final judgment on our relative worth. But he'd also orchestrated my rescue. Not just financial rescue, but the kind of vindication that would prove to everyone who'd ever underestimated me that their assessment had been catastrophically wrong. My phone rang, Alistair's number again. Mother, I just wanted to check on you. I know today was hard with the will reading and everything. How are you handling your inheritance, sweetheart? It's overwhelming. Genevieve's already hired an interior designer for 3 of the houses. She wants to start renovations next month. Maybe throw a big party to celebrate. His voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there during the will reading. Mother, can I ask you something? Of course. Did Father ever mention anything about the costs of maintaining those properties, like monthly expenses, property taxes, that kind of thing? I felt my heart clench for my son, who was beginning to glimpse the mathematical reality behind his windfall. Did you ask Solicitor Caldwell about ongoing financial obligations? I tried to, but Genevieve said she'd handle all the financial planning. She's good with numbers, and she's excited about the opportunity to really make these properties shine. He paused. But Mother, I looked up property taxes on Miami Beach last night for just 1 house. The annual taxes are more than I make in 3 months. And you have 7 houses. 7 houses, he repeated. And I heard the first crack in his voice. The first recognition that gifts could sometimes be more expensive than anyone anticipated. Alistair, I want you to promise me something. What? Before you sign any renovation contracts or take on any additional debt, have an accountant review all the financial obligations. Promise me you'll understand exactly what you're committing to before you commit to it. Mother, why do you sound like you know something I don't? I looked at Percival's letter, at his careful explanation of controlled financial education and necessary life lessons, and realized that my ex-husband had understood our son better than Alistair understood himself. I know that your father loved you more than you realize, and I know that sometimes the most expensive lessons are also the most valuable ones. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment holding the key to a safety deposit box that contained contracts worth millions of dollars. While 40 miles away in his expensive house, my son was probably calculating property taxes and wondering why his inheritance suddenly felt more like a burden than a blessing. Some gifts, I was learning, came with instructions that weren't immediately obvious. But eventually, if you were patient and observant and willing to learn from your mistakes, the lessons became clear. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, the people who loved you most were waiting to catch you when you finally understood the difference between what you wanted and what you actually needed. 3 weeks after the will reading, Kenora was reviewing geological surveys at her kitchen table when Alistair's panicked phone call shattered her quiet evening. Mother, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. His voice carried a strain she hadn't heard since he was 12 and had accidentally broken the neighbor's window with a baseball. But this wasn't childhood mischief. This was adult terror. What's wrong, sweetheart? How much do you know about Father's financial situation before he died? I mean his real financial situation. Kenora set down the water rights documentation she'd been reviewing her engineer's mind, immediately calculating the implications of his question. 3 weeks was exactly how long it would take for someone to receive the first quarterly property tax assessments on 7 Miami Beach mansions. Alistair, what's happened? The bills. Mother. Jesus Christ. The bills. His voice cracked slightly. Property taxes on 7 houses, not for the year, just for this quarter, come to $218,000. $218,000. Mother. That's more than I make in a year. Kenora closed her eyes, remembering Percival's careful calculations, his mathematical precision in designing this moment of revelation. Have you talked to Genevieve about this? Genevieve says not to worry. She says rich people always find ways to handle property taxes, that father must have had accountants and financial advisors who manage this stuff. His laugh was bitter and sharp. She's hired 3 more interior designers and ordered custom furniture for the beach house, $40,000 for a dining room set, because we need to live up to the property's potential. And the mortgage payments. That's the other thing. Father didn't leave us these houses free and clear. There are mortgages on 6 of them with combined monthly payments of, Kenora heard papers rustling, $73,000 a month. $73,000 monthly plus property taxes, plus insurance, plus maintenance costs on 7 luxury properties that required constant upkeep to maintain their value. Percival hadn't just given Alistair houses. He'd given him a financial time bomb with a very short fuse. Alistair, how long can you afford to maintain those obligations? 4 months. Maybe 5 if I liquidate my retirement accounts and max out every credit card I can qualify for. The desperation in his voice was growing more pronounced. Mother, I think father made a mistake. I think the lawyers screwed something up because there's no way he would have left me with this kind of debt burden. Oh, my sweet boy. Your father made exactly the decisions he intended to make. Have you considered selling some of the properties? Genevieve won't hear of it. She says selling would be betraying father's vision and abandoning the family legacy. She's already planning a 4th of July party at the main house, invited 200 people, hired caterers. His voice was rising toward hysteria. Mother, she ordered an ice sculpture that costs $8,000, $8,000 for frozen water that's going to melt in 4 hours. Kenora thought about her own inheritance, sitting 90 miles away, in a seemingly worthless warehouse, generating more monthly income than Alistair's 7 mansions combined. But Percival had been right about the timing. Alistair needed to understand the weight of his burden before he could appreciate the lightness of real financial security. Alistair, what do you need from me? I need to know if father ever mentioned anything about backup plans. Emergency funds, additional assets that aren't in the will, anything that might help me figure out how to handle this. The safety deposit box key sat in her jewelry drawer, surrounded by the corporate contracts that would solve all of Alistair's financial problems instantly. But opening that box now would deprive him of the education Percival had designed, would prevent him from learning the difference between earned security and inherited debt. Son, your father was always careful with money. If he left you those properties, he believed you could handle them. But what if I can't? What if I'm not smart enough or strong enough, or whatever enough to manage this kind of responsibility? The vulnerability in his voice broke her heart. But Kenora forced herself to remember Percival's letter. His careful explanation of necessary lessons and controlled failures. Alistair, what does Genevieve say when you express these concerns to her? She tells me I'm being negative, that successful people don't focus on problems, they focus on opportunities, that I need to think bigger and embrace abundance. His laugh was hollow. Yesterday, she suggested we take out additional loans against the properties to fund renovations that would maximize our lifestyle potential. More debt, more leverage, more commitment to a financial structure that was already beyond Alistair's ability to sustain. Genevieve wasn't just failing to help. She was actively accelerating his financial destruction. Alistair, I want you to do something for me. I want you to sit down with Genevieve and have a serious conversation about selling at least 4 of the properties. Use the proceeds to pay off the mortgages on the remaining 3 and create a sustainable financial situation. She'll never agree to that. Why not? He paused, and Kenora could almost hear him processing the implications of his own words. Because she's already told everyone about the 7 houses, posted pictures on social media, bragged to her friends, used them as proof that she married into real money. Selling any of them would be admitting that we can't afford to maintain them. And how do you feel about that reasoning? I feel like I'm drowning, mother. I feel like I inherited an anchor disguised as a life preserver, and my wife is telling me to dive deeper instead of swimming toward shore. The analogy was more accurate than Alistair realized. Percival had indeed given him an anchor. 7 anchors, actually. Each one heavy enough to drag him under if he couldn't figure out how to cut himself free. Alistair, what would happen if you made this decision without Genevieve's agreement? If you simply decided that financial survival was more important than maintaining appearances? He was quiet for a long time. I don't know. We've never disagreed about anything major before. She usually handles all the big decisions, and I just go along with whatever she thinks is best, because her judgment has been so reliable in other areas. What do you mean? Kenora thought about the £40,000 dining room set, the $8,000 ice sculpture, the 3 interior designers working simultaneously on properties that couldn't generate enough rental income to cover their basic carrying costs. I mean that someone who spends $40,000 on furniture, while you're calculating whether you can afford property taxes, might not have the financial judgment required to manage a 7-property portfolio. Mother, are you saying Genevieve doesn't understand money? I'm saying that understanding money and being excited about spending money are 2 very different skill sets. After they hung up, Kenora sat in her apartment, thinking about the difference between teaching and rescuing, between helping someone learn and enabling someone to avoid learning. Percival had designed Alistair's inheritance to be educational, but education required letting students make mistakes and experience consequences. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photo of Genevieve raising a champagne glass in what appeared to be a very expensive restaurant, with a caption that read, "Celebrating the Monroe legacy, Miami chic, living just blessed." The photo had been tagged with Alistair's name, but he wasn't in the frame. He was probably home calculating debt service payments and trying to figure out how to afford the lifestyle his wife was broadcasting to the world. Some lessons, Kenora realized, were harder to learn than others. Some teachers had to watch their students struggle with problems that had obvious solutions, waiting for the moment when help would be education rather than enablement. And some inheritances came with instructions beyond that required more courage than money, more wisdom than wealth, more love than logic. Percival had been right about one thing. Their son was about to discover what he was really made of when everything he thought he wanted turned out to cost more than he could afford. The question was whether he would learn those lessons quickly enough to save himself, or whether he would need to lose everything before he understood the difference between assets and liabilities. Either way, Kenora would be here when he was ready to rebuild his life based on character instead of inheritance. Some safety nets, after all, were worth waiting to deploy. The confrontation came on a humid Thursday afternoon in July, when Genevieve arrived at Kenora's apartment building without calling. Her face was flushed with the kind of rage that comes from watching carefully constructed plans collapse in real time. Kenora saw her through her living room window, marching across the parking lot in designer heels that were completely impractical for Memphis pavement, clutching her oversized purse like a weapon. The Maserati she was driving, a recent purchase to match their new lifestyle, sat in a visitor space with the engine still running. The doorbell rang with sharp, insistent bursts that suggested someone who'd moved past polite social conventions into pure desperation. "Kenora, we need to talk," Genevieve announced. The moment Kenora opened the door, pushing past her into her modest living room without waiting for an invitation. This has gone far enough. She looked around Kenora's apartment. With the kind of assessment Kenora had seen her use at garage sales, cataloguing, evaluating, dismissing most of what she saw as unworthy of her attention. Her gaze lingered on Kenora's second-hand furniture. Her small television, her collection of engineering textbooks arranged on simple wooden shelves. "Genevieve, what can I do for you? You can stop pretending you don't know what's happening." She turned to face Kenora, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the stress fractures around her eyes. "Alistair is talking about selling 5 of the Miami properties." "5 of them, Kenora? Do you understand what that means?" "It means he's trying to create a sustainable financial situation. It means he's giving up. It means he's letting Percival's legacy get carved up and sold off because he doesn't have the vision to see the bigger picture." Genevieve began pacing Kenora's small living room like a caged animal. "Those houses represent everything Percival worked for, everything the Monroe family stands for. They're not just properties, they're symbols of success." Kenora settled into her reading chair, the same one she'd owned for 15 years, and studied her former daughter-in-law with the detached curiosity of an engineer examining a structural failure in progress. "Genevieve, what do you think Percival's primary concern was when he planned his estate? Preserving the family wealth, maintaining the Monroe reputation, making sure his legacy lived on through the properties and investments he'd built over a lifetime of hard work. And if those properties are bankrupting his son, they're not bankrupting anyone." The words exploded out of her with enough force to make Kenora's neighbor's dog start barking through the thin walls. Rich people don't go bankrupt from owning too many houses. They find ways to make it work. They take out loans. They leverage assets. They think creatively about solutions. How much creative thinking have you done about generating $73,000 in monthly mortgage payments? Genevieve's face went pale beneath her foundation. "How do you know about the mortgage payments?" "Alistair told me. He's been calling every few days, asking for advice about managing the financial obligations Percival left him." "Those are private family matters. Alistair shouldn't be discussing our finances with anyone, even you, even his mother. Even his mother, who received a worthless warehouse, while you inherited valuable real estate that requires sophisticated management strategies." Kenora almost smiled at that. Sophisticated management strategies, from a woman whose idea of financial planning involved maxing out credit cards to fund ice sculptures. "Genevieve, tell me about these sophisticated strategies." She straightened her shoulders, adopting the confident posture she used when explaining things to people she considered intellectually inferior. "We're exploring several options. Additional financing against the properties to fund renovations that will increase their rental value. Corporate partnerships with luxury vacation rental companies. Maybe selling a few properties at significant profits and using the proceeds to develop the remaining ones into even more valuable assets." Kenora listened to her recite what sounded like talking points from late-night real estate infomercials, watching her face grow more animated as she convinced herself that debt could be transformed into wealth through creative thinking and positive attitude. And if those strategies don't work, they'll work. They have to work. Genevieve stopped pacing and fixed Kenora with the kind of stare she probably thought was intimidating. "But Kenora, there's something you need to understand. Alistair is starting to listen to negative influences, people who don't understand wealth, who are scared of taking big risks for big rewards. People like me. People like you." She moved closer, her voice dropping to the conspiratorial tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while saying unreasonable things. "I know you mean well, but you've never operated at this level of financial complexity. You've never managed multiple properties or dealt with the kind of tax strategies and investment opportunities that come with real wealth." "You're right. I've never owned 7 mortgaged mansions that cost more to maintain than they generate in income." "I see. You're thinking small. You're focused on monthly cash flow instead of long-term asset appreciation and lifestyle maximization? Genevieve pulled out her phone and began scrolling through photos. Look at what we're building, Kenora. Look at the life we're creating. The photos were impressive, Kenora had to admit. Beautifully decorated rooms, infinity pools reflecting Miami sunsets, parties with attractive people holding expensive drinks in stunning settings. It looked like the lifestyle magazines that Genevieve had been reading religiously for the past 5 years. It's very beautiful, Kenora said honestly. How much is it costing? Investment requires capital expenditure. You can't build wealth without spending money to maximize asset potential. She swiped to another photo, a catered party on what appeared to be a yacht. This is what success looks like, Kenora. This is what Percival wanted for his family. Kenora stood up and walked to her kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of iced tea and the folder she'd been preparing for this conversation. Genevieve, can I show you something? What? Kenora opened the folder and spread out financial projections, debt service calculations and cash flow analyses that she'd prepared, using the same engineering precision she'd once applied to infrastructure projects. These are the real numbers for your 7 Miami properties. Monthly carrying costs, annual property taxes, insurance, maintenance, utilities, everything required to maintain them at the level you're posting on social media. Genevieve glanced at the papers dismissively. Numbers can be manipulated to support any conclusion. Successful people focus on possibilities, not limitations. Genevieve, based on Alistair's current income and your current spending rate, you'll be bankrupt within 4 months. That's ridiculous. 4 months. And that's assuming you stop all non-essential spending today and don't take on any additional debt. You don't understand how wealth works, Kenora. Rich people don't worry about monthly cash flow. They think in terms of equity appreciation, long-term value creation. Rich people also understand the difference between assets and liabilities, Kenora interrupted. Between income-producing investments and debt-financed lifestyle purchases. What's that supposed to mean? Kenora pulled out another set of documents, the geological surveys and water rights assessments that Percival had commissioned for the Mississippi warehouse property. It means that sometimes the most valuable things don't look valuable to people who only understand surface appearances. Genevieve leaned over the papers, her expression shifting from dismissiveness to confusion to something approaching panic as she realized what she was reading. These are mineral rights assessments for your warehouse property, groundwater extraction rights, specifically for one of the purest aquifer sources in the Mississippi Delta. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, flicked up to meet Kenora's. I don't understand what this means. It means that my worthless warehouse sits on top of water rights worth approximately $8 million annually in licensing fees. The color drained completely from Genevieve's face. That's not possible. Kenora pulled out the corporate contracts. Nestle, Coca-Cola, Danone, each one bearing signatures and dates that proved their authenticity. $2.3 million in quarterly royalty payments starting 90 days after Percival's death. Renewable contracts with automatic escalation clauses. $8 million annually. Genevieve's voice was barely a whisper. More than your 7 Miami houses could generate in rental income, even if they were debt-free and fully occupied year-round. She stared at the contracts, her hands shaking slightly as she processed the magnitude of what Kenora was showing her. Percival knew about this. He knew when he wrote the will. Percival commissioned the geological surveys. He negotiated the corporate contracts. He understood exactly what he was giving each of us. But that means... Genevieve looked up at Kenora with the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality were collapsing in real time. That means you're wealthy. Really wealthy. I'm financially secure in a way that doesn't depend on borrowed money or unsustainable debt service. Kenora watched Genevieve sit down heavily in her second-hand chair, the fight going out of her like air from a punctured balloon. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let everyone think you got the worthless inheritance? Because Alistair needed to learn the difference between wealth and debt, between assets that generate income and liabilities that consume it, between someone who loves him and someone who loves his money. I love Alistair. Do you, or do you love the lifestyle you thought his inheritance would provide? Genevieve was quiet for a long time, staring at the contracts that proved her assumption about Percival's final judgment had been catastrophically wrong. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of desperation Kenora had never heard before. What happens now? Now you and Alistair decide whether you want to build a life based on financial reality or continue pursuing lifestyle fantasies that will destroy everything Percival actually left behind. And if we choose wrong, Kenora looked at this young woman who'd spent 5 years treating her like an embarrassment to the Monroe family name, who'd celebrated her apparent poverty with such theatrical enthusiasm, who was now discovering that her understanding of wealth had been as shallow as her understanding of character. If you choose wrong, you'll learn what it actually costs to maintain 7 mortgaged mansions when you don't have the income to support them. And you'll just watch us fail. I'll be here when Alistair is ready to learn the lessons his father tried to teach him. Whether you're part of that learning process or part of what he needs to learn from, that's up to you. As Genevieve left Kenora's apartment, her designer heels clicking against the pavement, with less confidence than they'd carried when she'd arrived, Kenora realized that Percival's plan was working exactly as he'd intended. The education was brutal, but it was thorough. And sometimes the most expensive lessons were also the most valuable ones. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late August, jolting Kenora from the deepest sleep she'd had in weeks. Alistair's name glowed on her phone screen, and she knew without answering that the education Percival had designed had reached its inevitable conclusion. Mother. His voice was raw, broken in a way she hadn't heard since he was 8 years old and his pet hamster had died. I'm sorry to wake you, but I need help. Where are you? Sitting in my car outside the bankruptcy attorney's office. I have an appointment in 6 hours. His laugh was hollow, desperate. Turns out you can't leverage your way out of debt when you don't have any actual assets to leverage. Kenora pulled on her robe and walked to her kitchen making coffee, while Alistair told her about the past month. The cascade of financial failures that had consumed everything he'd thought he owned. We lost 3 of the houses last week foreclosure. The bank seized them when we missed the 3rd mortgage payment. His voice was steady now. The calm that comes after panic has burned itself out. Genevieve hired a lawyer to fight it. But you can't fight math, Mother. You can't argue with numbers that don't add up. What about the other 4 properties? We're selling them. Fire sale prices because everyone knows we're desperate. We'll be lucky to walk away with enough to pay off the remaining mortgages and the credit card debt. He paused, and Kenora heard the sound of the traffic in the background, the city waking up around her son's financial catastrophe. The lawyer says we might clear $200,000 after everything's settled if we're lucky. $200,000 from an inheritance that had seemed worth tens of millions just 4 months ago. Percival's brutal mathematics had played out exactly as he'd calculated. And Genevieve, Alistair's voice broke slightly. Genevieve filed for divorce yesterday. Her lawyer is demanding half of whatever's left after the bankruptcy, plus alimony. Plus, she wants me to assume responsibility for all the debt she accumulated, trying to maximize our lifestyle potential. Kenora closed her eyes, feeling grief for her son's pain and recognition that this moment had been inevitable from the first day Genevieve had celebrated inheriting 7 mansions without understanding their true cost. Alistair. Where are you staying? Extended stay hotel near the airport. It's cheap, and they don't ask many questions when you pay cash. His laugh was bitter. Amazing how fast your social circle disappears when they realize you can't afford to split the check at the restaurants they like. Son, I'm coming to get you. Mother, no. I appreciate the offer, but I need to handle this myself. I need to figure out how to rebuild from whatever's left after the lawyers finish picking through the wreckage. You don't have to rebuild alone. Yes, I do. Because if I don't learn how to stand on my own 2 feet now, I'll never learn. His voice was getting stronger, more determined. I've spent 40 years having other people solve my problems for me. Father with money, Genevieve with decisions, you with advice I was too stupid to take. This is my mess, and I need to be the one who cleans it up. Kenora felt a surge of pride for her son, recognizing in his words the first evidence of the man Percival had hoped he could become. But she also felt the weight of the sealed envelope in her jewelry drawer, the key that could solve every problem Alistair was facing if she chose to reveal Percival's final gift. Alistair, what if I told you that your father anticipated this moment? That he had plans in place to help you rebuild when you were ready to learn from what happened? I'd say that father was a lot smarter than his son, and that whatever help he arranged, I probably don't deserve it after the choices I've made. What if I told you that you do deserve it? That everything that's happened was designed to teach you lessons you needed to learn? Mother, what are you talking about? Kenora thought about Percival's letter. His careful explanation of controlled education and necessary consequences about the warehouse in Mississippi that Alistair still believed was worthless, about the corporate contracts that could provide financial security for the rest of his life, about the plan that required Alistair to lose everything before he could appreciate what real wealth actually meant. I'm talking about coming home, sweetheart. Not to Memphis, not to your old life, but to Mississippi, to the warehouse that everyone thinks is worthless. The warehouse, mother, I don't understand. Pack whatever fits in your car and drive to Yazoo City. There's something I need to show you. Something your father left that you're not going to understand until you see it with your own eyes. Is this about that warehouse father left you, mother? I know you're trying to help, but I can't accept charity from you too. I've already cost my family enough. It's not charity, Alistair. It's education. The final lesson your father designed for you, but you had to earn the right to learn it. After they hung up, Kenora sat in her kitchen, waiting for sunrise, and thinking about the difference between rescuing someone and teaching them to rescue themselves, between enabling weakness and rewarding growth, between helping someone avoid consequences and helping them learn from consequences they'd already survived. At 8:00 a.m., she drove to First National Bank of Yazoo City and opened the safety deposit box that contained Percival's final surprise. The corporate contracts, the geological surveys, the bottle of champagne he'd been saving for this moment. Everything was exactly where he'd promised it would be. She also found something he hadn't mentioned in his letter. A deed transferring half ownership of the warehouse property to Alistair, with a note explaining the corporate structure that would make him an equal partner in the water rights operation. Percival hadn't just planned to catch their son when he fell. He'd planned to give him the tools to build something sustainable from the wreckage of his Miami dreams, but only after Alistair had learned the difference between inherited wealth and earned wisdom. Alistair arrived that evening driving a 10-year-old Toyota with everything he owned packed into the back seat. He looked older, thinner, worn down by months of financial pressure and social humiliation. But there was something different in his posture. Something that suggested he'd lost more than money in Miami. He'd lost illusions about himself and the world, Tim, that had been both limiting and protective. Mother, this place looks exactly the same as when I was a kid. Some things don't need to change, sweetheart. They just need to be appreciated for what they actually are, instead of what they appear to be. Kenora led him inside the warehouse to the conference table where she'd spread out all the documents Percival had left. The water rights assessments, the corporate contracts, the financial projections that showed sustainable wealth instead of flashy debt. Alistair, your father left you something much more valuable than 7 Miami mansions. He left you the opportunity to build real wealth based on renewable resources and sound business principles. She watched her son's face as he processed the geological surveys, the corporate agreements, the mathematical proof that the warehouse he'd always considered worthless was actually the foundation for generational wealth. He knew, Alistair whispered, his voice filled with awe, and something that might have been grief. He knew I'd lose everything in Miami. He knew Genevieve would leave. He knew I'd end up here broke and desperate, and finally ready to listen. He knew you needed to learn the difference between wealth and debt, between someone who loved you and someone who loved your money, between building something lasting and buying something impressive. And he knew you'd be here to catch me when I fell. We're going to catch each other, sweetheart. Partners in something your father built, but we're going to develop together. Something based on character instead of inheritance, on sustainable resources instead of leveraged dreams. That night, Alistair and Kenora opened Percival's champagne and toasted the beginning of a partnership that would honor everything valuable about the Monroe legacy while abandoning everything that had been destroying it from within. Some education Kenora was learning were worth the price of losing everything you thought you wanted, and some inheritances were worth waiting 40 years to receive. 6 months later, Kenora stood in the renovated warehouse office, watching Alistair review quarterly royalty reports with the focused attention of someone who'd learned the hard way to understand every number that appeared on a financial statement. The corporate contracts were generating exactly what Percival had projected: $2.3 million every 3 months, with automatic escalation clauses that would increase payments as extraction volumes grew. Nestlé wants to expand their operation by 40%, Alistair said, looking up from the Coca-Cola quarterly assessment. They're projecting demand increases that would bump our licensing fees to $3.2 million per quarter within 18 months. What do you think? I think we need to study the environmental impact projections before we agree to any extraction increases. Sustainable income only works if the resource remains sustainable. He gestured toward the geological surveys spread across his desk. The aquifer can handle increased extraction, but we need to make sure we're not sacrificing long-term stability for short-term profits. Kenora smiled, recognizing in Alistair's careful analysis the engineering mindset that valued substance over appearance, sustainability over maximum exploitation. Percival would have been proud to see their son applying lessons learned through financial catastrophe to business decisions that would affect generations. The warehouse had been transformed over the past months, from abandoned storage space into a functioning corporate headquarters. Not luxurious. They'd deliberately chosen efficiency over impression, but professional, comfortable, and designed to accommodate growth. Alistair had moved into a small apartment above the office, embracing the simplicity of a life built around work that mattered rather than a lifestyle that impressed people. There's something else, Alistair said, pulling out a letter marked with a return address Kenora didn't recognize. I got this yesterday from Genevieve's divorce attorney. Kenora felt her stomach tighten. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, with Genevieve receiving half of the proceeds from the Miami house sales, roughly $180,000 after legal fees and debt settlement. She'd moved back to Atlanta, taken a job with an event planning company, and disappeared from their lives with the efficient thoroughness of someone cutting ties with a failed investment. What does she want now? She's found out about the warehouse income. Apparently, she hired a private investigator to research my current financial situation, probably thinking I'd hidden assets during the divorce proceedings. Alistair's expression was carefully neutral, but Kenora could see the tension around his eyes. Her lawyer is claiming that I committed fraud by concealing the water rights operation from the divorce court. You didn't know about the water rights during the divorce. I know that. You know that. But her lawyer is arguing that Percival must have told me about the potential income that I deliberately hid community assets to avoid sharing them in the settlement. Kenora thought about the carefully orchestrated timeline of Percival's plan. The sealed letters and safety deposit boxes that had ensured Alistair couldn't learn about his inheritance until after he'd lost everything he'd thought he wanted. Percival had protected their son not just from premature wealth, but from having that wealth claimed by someone who'd never earned the right to it. Alistair, what does your attorney say? He says we have ironclad documentation proving I had no knowledge of the water rights until after the divorce was final. The bank records show when I first accessed the safety deposit box, the geological surveys are all dated after Genevieve left, and the corporate contracts weren't activated until I became a legal partner in the operation. Alistair's smile was grim, but satisfied. Turns out Father's obsession with documentation and legal precision worked in our favor. And Genevieve's financial situation, according to what her lawyer let slip, she's struggling. The event planning job doesn't pay much, and apparently she's been living beyond her means, expecting to find another wealthy boyfriend who could support the lifestyle she'd gotten used to. Alistair shook his head. She's 35 years old, and she still thinks someone else should fund her dreams. Kenora's phone rang. Attorney Eleanor Vance, the environmental lawyer who'd been helping them navigate the complex regulations around groundwater extraction rights. Kenora, I have news about the federal environmental protection designation you applied for. Good news or complicated news? Excellent news. The EPA has approved your application to designate the aquifer as a protected water source under federal conservation guidelines. This gives you additional legal protections against over-extraction and ensures the resource will be preserved for future generations. After she hung up, Alistair looked at her with the expression of someone still learning to process good news after months of financial disaster. Federal protection status. It means that no one can ever exploit this resource irresponsibly. It means the income we're generating will be sustainable for our children and grandchildren, assuming you ever have any. Kenora paused, studying his face. Alistair, have you thought about what you want your life to look like going forward? You mean beyond rebuilding my credit and learning how to live on a budget? I mean beyond survival, beyond just cleaning up the mess from Miami. What do you actually want to build with this opportunity? Alistair was quiet for a long time, looking out the warehouse windows at the Mississippi Delta landscape that had seemed unremarkable when they were children, but now represented security and possibility. I want to build something that matters, he said finally. Not just financial security, but something that contributes to the community, that creates opportunities for other people. He gestured toward the small town visible in the distance. Yazoo City has been struggling for decades. Young people leave because there aren't enough good jobs. Businesses close because there isn't enough economic activity. What if we used some of our income to change that? What did you have in mind? Technical training programs, apprenticeships with local businesses? Maybe a small business incubator that helps people start sustainable enterprises instead of depending on outside investment that might disappear. His voice was getting more animated as he developed the idea. We could create a model for rural economic development that other communities could replicate. Kenora felt something warm settle in her chest. Not just pride in Alistair's vision, but recognition that Percival's brutal education had accomplished exactly what he'd hoped. Their son had learned to think about wealth as responsibility rather than privilege, as an opportunity to contribute rather than a license to consume. There's something else I want to discuss, Alistair said, pulling out a folder Kenora hadn't seen before. I've been working with an architect on plans for the property, not just the warehouse, but the whole 40 acres. The plans were beautiful and practical. The warehouse expanded into a community centre with meeting spaces and training facilities. The surrounding land developed with small cottages for visiting instructors and temporary housing for people participating in training programs. A design that honoured the rural character of the area while creating infrastructure for economic growth. Alistair, this is remarkable. It's what Father would have wanted. Not just wealth preservation, but wealth utilization, using resources to create opportunities instead of just accumulating assets. How much would all of this cost? About $6 million for the full development spread over 3 years, but the community impact would be worth far more than the investment. Alistair's expression was serious, determined. "Mother, I want to do this right. I want to build something that honors everything Father taught me, including the lessons I had to learn the hard way." That evening, as Alistair worked late on development plans and corporate partnership proposals, Kenora walked the property, thinking about inheritance and education, about the difference between gifts and lessons, about the strange mathematics of love that sometimes required destroying everything someone thought they wanted in order to give them what they actually needed. Somewhere in Atlanta, Genevieve was probably calculating legal strategies for claiming money she'd never earned from resources she'd never valued. But here in Mississippi, Alistair was designing a future based on sustainable wealth and community contribution, proving that Percival's faith in their son's eventual character had been justified. Some lessons Kenora realized were worth the price of losing 7 mansions to learn, and some inheritances were worth more than money. They were worth becoming the kind of person who deserved them. Percival would have been proud to see their son finally understanding the difference. 2 years later, Kenora stood beside Alistair on the front porch of what had once been an abandoned warehouse, watching a group of young adults celebrate their graduation and from the Delta Technical Training Institute with the kind of joy that comes from earning something valuable through honest work. The ceremony had been simple but meaningful. 23 graduates receiving certifications in sustainable agriculture, water management, and renewable energy systems, skills that would keep them in Mississippi instead of driving them to Atlanta or Memphis in search of opportunities that didn't exist in their hometown. Maya Johnson got the job with the Agricultural Extension Service, Alistair said, watching a young woman in her early 20s hug her parents while clutching her certificate like a diploma. Full benefits, $48,000 a year, starting salary, working on sustainable farming initiatives throughout the Delta. And Marcus Williams, starting his own solar installation business. "We're providing the initial capital through the small business incubator, and he's already got contracts lined up for 6 months. Alistair's smile was proud, but not possessive. The expression of someone who'd learned to find satisfaction in other people's success rather than just his own accumulation. The property had been transformed beyond anything Kenora had imagined when Alistair had first shown her his architectural plans. The warehouse now housed classrooms, laboratories, and workshop spaces that hummed with the energy of people learning skills that would change their lives. The surrounding cottages provided temporary housing for instructors and students from other rural communities who came to study their model for economic development. But the most remarkable transformation wasn't architectural. It was personal. Alistair had become the man Percival had always believed he could be given the right circumstances and sufficient motivation. He moved through the world now, with the quiet confidence that comes from building something meaningful rather than inheriting something impressive. He understood money as a tool rather than a trophy, wealth as responsibility rather than privilege. "There's something I want to show you," Alistair said, pulling out an envelope marked with familiar handwriting. "This came yesterday." The return address was from a women's correctional facility in Georgia. Genevieve's name was printed in the corner, and Kenora's heart clenched with unexpected sympathy for whatever circumstances had led her former daughter-in-law to prison. What happened to her? Wire fraud. She convinced 3 elderly investors to put money into a fake real estate development scheme promising them luxury vacation properties that didn't exist. Alistair's voice was careful, controlled. She got 18 months and full restitution requirements. Kenora thought about the woman who'd celebrated inheriting 7 Miami mansions with such theatrical enthusiasm, who'd spent money like someone who'd never learned the difference between assets and liabilities, who'd treated marriage like a business acquisition and family like a networking opportunity. What does she want? To apologize? And to ask if we'd consider hiring her for the re-entry program we're starting next month. The re-entry program, another expansion of Alistair's vision for community development, providing job training and transitional support for people leaving the criminal justice system, helping them rebuild their lives through honest work and genuine skill development. "Do you want to hire her?" "I want to do what's right." Not what feels good, not what provides emotional satisfaction, but what's actually right for everyone involved. Alistair looked out at the community they'd built at the gardens, where former students were growing food for the local farmers' market at the workshop, where current students were building furniture that would be sold to fund future expansion. And what do you think is right? I think Genevieve needs to learn the same lessons I had to learn. That security comes from what you build, not what you inherit. That respect comes from contribution, not consumption. That real wealth means having something valuable to offer other people. And you think she's ready to learn those lessons? I think she's finally desperate enough to consider learning them. Prison has a way of clarifying priorities that 7 Miami mansions couldn't provide. Kenora read Genevieve's letter while Alistair continued explaining his thoughts about the re-entry program. Her handwriting was different, smaller, more careful, lacking the confident loops and flourishes that had characterized her signature on credit card receipts and mortgage documents. Dean, I know I have no right to ask for anything from you or your family, but I'm hoping you might consider giving me the chance to earn forgiveness rather than just requesting it. I've spent 2 years thinking about the choices I made, the person I became, the way I treated people who deserved better from me. I understand now that I was never really married to you. I was married to an idea of what your family could provide for me. I understand that I treated your mother like an obstacle rather than recognizing her as someone who'd spent her life building the kind of character I'd never bothered to develop. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm hoping for the opportunity to prove that prison taught me something about the difference between wanting things and earning things. If you have any place in your programs for someone who needs to learn how to contribute instead of just consume, I'd be grateful for the chance. I know you're building something important in Mississippi. I've been following the news coverage of your community development work, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished, even though I have no right to feel proud of someone whose success I tried to undermine. Whether you decide to help me or not, I want you to know that I'm sorry, not just for the legal problems I caused, but for the years I wasted trying to be someone else's idea of successful instead of learning what success actually means. Sincerely, Genevieve. Kenora folded the letter and handed it back to Alistair, thinking about redemption and second chances, about the difference between punishment and education, about the strange ways that consequences could sometimes lead to genuine growth. What will you tell her? That she can apply for the program like everyone else. That her past mistakes won't disqualify her, but they won't give her special consideration either. That if she's accepted, she'll start at the bottom and work her way up, based on effort and contribution, not history or connections. And if she succeeds, then she'll prove that people can change when they're finally ready to do the work. And if she fails, she'll prove that some people are more interested in appearing reformed than actually becoming reformed. As the afternoon wound down and the last of the graduation celebration was cleaned up, Alistair and Kenora walked through the property that had become their shared life's work. The Technical Institute was thriving. The small business incubator had helped launch 17 successful enterprises, and applications were coming in from rural communities across the South wanting to replicate their model. Alistair, do you ever regret losing the Miami houses? Every day, he said without hesitation. I regret the embarrassment, the financial devastation, the public humiliation of failing so spectacularly at something everyone expected me to succeed at. But I don't regret learning what I learned. I don't regret discovering what I'm actually capable of building when I stopped trying to maintain what someone else built for me. He gestured toward the institute, the workshops, the gardens where young people were learning to grow food and hope simultaneously. I don't regret finding out that Father loved me enough to let me fail at maintaining his legacy so I could succeed at creating my own. As the sun set over the Mississippi Delta, painting the sky in shades of gold, and Promise Kenora thought about Percival and his elaborate plan to save their son through controlled destruction, about the difference between gifts and education, about the mathematics of love that sometimes required losing everything you thought you wanted in order to discover what you actually needed. Alistair was right. Some lessons were worth the price of 7 Miami mansions, and some inheritances were worth more than money, more than property, more than anything that could be calculated on a balance sheet. Kenora, there's something I need to tell you, Alistair said, as they reached the porch, where this whole journey had begun, with a warehouse that everyone thought was worthless. What's that, sweetheart? Thank you for catching me when I fell, for helping me understand that Father's gift wasn't the Miami houses or even the warehouse. It was the chance to become someone who deserved what he was really trying to give me. And what was he trying to give you? Alistair smiled, looking out at the community they'd built together, at the evidence of lives changed through honest work and genuine opportunity. The satisfaction of building something that matters, the security of knowing it's sustainable, and the wisdom to understand that real wealth isn't about what you inherit. It's about what you do with whatever chances you're given to prove who you really are. Kenora squeezed her son's hand, feeling the calluses he'd earned through 2 years of physical work and community building, thinking about the man he'd become, when everything he'd thought he wanted had been stripped away. Your father would be proud, she said. I hope so. But Mother, yes, I'm finally proud too. Not of what I inherited, but of what I built after I lost it all and found out what I was really made of. Outside, the Mississippi Delta stretched toward horizons that held nothing but possibility, and Kenora realized that some gifts were worth waiting a lifetime to receive. Pride doesn't come from what you inherit, son. It comes from what you build after everything falls apart, and you choose to rebuild with your own hands, your own character, and your own understanding of what actually matters. Kenora's story is a profound journey into the true meaning of inheritance, not just of wealth, but of wisdom and self-worth. It challenges us to look beyond the glittering facades of perceived success and to question the value systems society often champions. How many of us chase the 7 mansions, the flashy job titles, the Instagram perfect lives, the approval of those who only see our surface, while neglecting the worthless warehouse within the quiet strengths, the intrinsic capabilities that truly define us. Kenora's narrative is a potent reminder that true security isn't found in what is given, but in what is earned, built and sustained through character and resilience. Her son Alistair's painful education teaches him that sometimes the greatest act of love is to allow someone to experience the consequences of their choices, to fall so they can learn to stand on their own. It's a testament to the idea that failure isn't the end, but often a brutal yet essential redirection towards discovering our genuine purpose and the people who truly matter. This story urges us to cultivate patience, to trust in our own quiet power, and to understand that the most meaningful victories are often achieved not through grand declarations, but through meticulous, unseen effort. It's a call to examine our own lives. Are we building something that genuinely matters, or are we simply maintaining an illusion for others? If you saw yourself in Kenora's story, the quiet strength, the underestimated wisdom, the unyielding belief in true value, then perhaps it's time to look past the surface glamour and embrace the profound, sustainable wealth of your own character. Kenora's story is a profound journey into the true meaning of inheritance, not just of wealth, but of wisdom and self-worth. It challenges us to look beyond the glittering facades of perceived success and to question the value systems society often champions. How many of us chase the 7 mansions, the flashy job titles, the Instagram perfect lives, the approval of those who only see our surface, while neglecting the worthless warehouse within the quiet strengths, the intrinsic capabilities that truly define us. Kenora's narrative is a potent reminder that true security isn't found in what is given, but in what is earned, built and sustained through character and resilience. Her son Alistair's painful education teaches him that sometimes the greatest act of love is to allow someone to experience the consequences of their choices, to fall so they can learn to stand on their own. It's a testament to the idea that failure isn't the end, but often a brutal yet essential redirection towards discovering our genuine purpose and the people who truly matter. This story urges us to cultivate patience, to trust in our own quiet power, and to understand that the most meaningful victories are often achieved not through grand declarations, but through meticulous, unseen effort. It's a call to examine our own lives. Are we building something that genuinely matters, or are we simply maintaining an illusion for others? If you saw yourself in Kenora's story, the quiet strength, the underestimated wisdom, the unyielding belief in true value, then perhaps it's time to look past the surface glamour and embrace the profound, sustainable wealth of your own character. Subscribe for more tales of resilience, unexpected triumph, and the hidden power of those who dare to define success on their own terms. May your journey be filled with peace and clarity.